Well, to my far left, Councilman Alan Dom, and to my right, Councilman David O. Will the clerk read the title of the bill?
Bill number 160467, an ordinance authorizing transfers and appropriations for fiscal year 2016 within the Grants Revenue Fund from the Director of Finance, provision for other grants to the Managing Director.
Thank you. Will our budget director?
Good morning, Chairwoman Quiñones-Sánchez and members of the Appropriation Committee. My name is Anna Adams, and I serve as Budget Director for the City of Philadelphia. I appear before you today to testify on Bill number 160467. Bill number 160467 provides for a transfer within the Grants Revenue Fund in the amount of $27,042,737. This ordinance will provide transfer appropriations to expenditure classes for the cost of the security related to the Democratic National Convention in July 2016. These funds are derived from a $43 million Department of Justice grants. The remaining appropriations will be requested within the FY17 budget. This FY16 appropriation will be allocated in the following way. Approximately $9.7 million will be provided for Class 200 support. Examples of expenses include a secure bus system for delegate movement, police liability insurance, and parking lot leases. An additional $9.7 million will be for the purchase of materials and supplies, which will be procured through existing contracts and includes a variety of public safety supplies. $7.7 million will be allocated for the purchase of equipment, which will be procured through existing contracts and includes the lease of police motorcycles, the purchase of police bicycles, and portable radios. I respectfully request that you report this bill out of committee with a favourable recommendation, and I further request that the rules of council be suspended so as to permit first reading at the next session of council. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this committee today and would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Additionally, representatives from the Managing Director's Office are available also to help provide further details.
Thank you. Before the chair recognizes Councilman Dom, of the materials that will be purchased, where will those corresponding departments keep them and how will they be allocated? Specifically police bicycles and other things. I'm
going to have Brian Abernathy, who's first Deputy Managing Director, also help answer some of these questions.
Thank you, Brian Abernathy, Deputy Managing Director. For any equipment that is purchased, it will be retained by the department that purchases it, and then we'll distribute it appropriately per their deployment needs going forward.
Chair recognizes Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good morning. It's just a general question. The Democratic National Convention is coming here. Do we know the total approximate cost of this event?
For security-related expenses, we're looking...
No, my question is the following.
For everything else?
The total, is there any cost for the City of Philadelphia?
So the way that we are looking at this, any cost we will bill to the DNC. So we will be tracking all of the expenditures that we believe are connected to other than security, which are covered by this Department of Justice grant. And so we'll be tracking them and monitoring them. We don't envision right now that this will be borne by the taxpayers.
So if a citizen asks myself or my colleagues, are we paying for this convention? Our answer is we're not paying anything?
That's the goal. We're assuming that we will be able to bill all of this to the DNC. But we're going to be making sure, part of this is also making sure that we keep all of our expenses in check. We don't want to... we're not trying to sort of inflate the costs so that we can bill more. We're trying to keep all of our costs under control, and that's being heavily managed through the Managing Director's Office.
And how do you make sure that you hold their feet to the fire, that they pick up the expenses?
We have a contract.
Excuse me?
We have a contract with the host committee and the DNCC.
Okay. And one other question, I wasn't here, but when the Pope visited Philadelphia, as of today, do you have any idea what that cost was to the city?
Yeah, the cost was about $16.7 million.
Because I thought, and my colleagues could answer this, but I thought that the cost was going to be like half of that to the city.
We ended up billing, and I wasn't, this is sort of before my time in this role, so my understanding of this is that we ended up billing the World Meeting of Families for a portion of that cost.
They didn't pay it?
They did. They paid what we billed them.
But we still wound up paying $16.7 million.
Yeah, I think we ended up billing them about 8 point something, and they paid that.
But when we went into that, that wasn't our impression. Wasn't our impression it was going to cost $7 or $8 million? I know you guys were,
Yeah,
it's not your administration.
I think that was a decision made by the prior administration.
So what I want to be careful of is that we don't
Which we
sit
will
here
be doing
in
the same
November
things.
and you come and tell us it's $20 million that would cost
Yeah.
us.
That's exactly why we are, I mean, and that's why Brian and I are taking this very seriously and making sure that we don't end up in the same situation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Along those lines, we already have overexpended on the overtime. As you hear the national rhetoric, there is an expectation there will be additional protests and others. At what point, if those additional costs get incurred, will the convention add to their budget in lieu of the fact that we're going to have to ensure public safety?
So our public safety overtime costs will be actually borne as part of this grant. And
Yeah,
so-
but if we go over the 43 million and the rhetoric that we see nationally leads to more and more protests, is there an understanding that they will absorb some of those costs?
Yes, but I would also say that we think we have enough flexibility within this grant to cover all of our expenses, even with the expected additional protests.
So, yes, if we end up going over budget,
Yes.
we will, they will.
We expect the host committee to make us whole for those expenses. But again, I think the total of this grant provides us enough flexibility that all of our overtime costs should be covered, even with the increase of expected protests.
Because part of the issue is we may need additional equipment, bikes and other things, as more permits get issued for the public actions.
I think at this point, if we needed additional personnel, we'd probably depend upon our mutual aid agreements with other jurisdictions to bring in specialized equipment, rather than purchase or lease additional equipment, given the
Right,
time period that
that's,
we're
I
looking
know
at.
that's why we're
Yep.
leasing most of the stuff, because there's a timing
Yes.
issue, and that's why we're here this morning, so that we can allow you to encumber some of these expenses. I just, going back to Councilman Dom's point, I just want to be real careful that, again, just because everybody keeps saying we're going to become ground zero and all of those things, that that there is an understanding that the host committee will absorb some of that. Because, $5 million or $6 million will pay for community schools. So,
Exactly.
Understood.
That's exactly right.
okay. Any other questions from the committee?
I'm just not clear on the process, and that is when police are working on the Democratic National Convention, how do you actually track the accounting of that? Is that done through a software system? How's that done?
So the way for all of these expenditures, we use, the way we manage it is that all of the expenses go through an index code, and we make sure that the index code is connected to this. So as they spend money, that will be attributed to this index code, and that everything has to be signed off by the managing director's office, so that we know that all of those are expenditures that we've agreed upon and that they are connected to this index code. And I think otherwise it's a management issue, making sure that that we track things. If the police are spending money that they attribute to the DNC, that we're tracking it and that we are aware of it. Some of that will be overtime, some of that will be other types of costs, and they just need to be able to attribute it to a certain index code.
You just have to make sure that, you're right, it's management. We have to make sure that all of the managers involved in the police department understand where that billing goes to.
And they are used to doing this for any kind of grant award. Many of the departments are used to doing this. So if you have a grant, you have to make sure that you're assigning the cost of the attributed. So departments are very used to doing this kind of work. It happens regularly because we have certain grants that are very restrictive about what kind of uses you can use. And eligibility. So the departments, the fiscal people within the departments are very used to doing this, and they're very good at doing this. But yeah, it takes some management, make sure there's a lot of communication, they understand anything that's connected to the DNC needs to be recorded differently, but they are very used to doing this.
So just curious, but what's the software system that they're using for that?
I believe it's called NDAR.
What is it?
Hi, Sam Phillips from the Office of Emergency Management. Every time there's a special event in the city or some event, they can code each person with a direct, so it's a DAR code, And so, for example, even July 4th, we'll be able to say how many police firefighters are deployed to that event.
But is there a specific software package that you're using, or is it just the city's internal software?
So for the police department specifically, there's their deployment management system, their HR system was actually developed in-house
And,
How long-
and
how
everything
long ago
has
was
to-
that developed?
Sorry.
Several years ago. So what you're telling me under the wire here is it probably needs to be updated.
Yes, I think everyone would be happy to see
I'm
updates.
going to bring
can I-
this up because the management of these processes are important to have the right tools in order to manage.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest, I mean, honestly, and I think we've had this conversation before, but the issue is that everything has to link to our financial system, which is called FAMOUS, which is our financial and accounting system, and it kind of becomes the basis of everything. And that is a very old system. And so I think kind of before we talk about kind of upgrading other types of systems, we have to make sure that that FAMOUS gets replaced and gets upgraded, and I think that's going to be a part of the biggest conversation with the IT director. That's a mammoth task, though, and it will take some time, but everything else flows in and out of FAMOUS, and so that's kind of the critical thing to get worked on first.
That system's called FAMOUS?
FAMOUS.
Like
It's
the like the deli at Fourth and Bedford?
FAMIS, FAMOUS.
Oh, famous. And how old is that system?
Oh, so we worked it out that it's older than me, but it's pretty old. Yeah, so it may be in need of upgrading. It's just a huge task to do that.
Okay. And the Office of Technology is working on that upgrade?
So the IT director has started a process of working with departments to understand what are their needs for the new IT capital budget rollout. And so he's in the process of soliciting what departments would like to see upgraded right now. And I'm sure this will go onto the list.
I only bring this up because you can only manage as well as the tools we give the people to manage with.
I agree.
So we have to really invest the money, get the right tools, and get the right technology.
Yeah, and I think we also recognize that part of that is improving processes. And sometimes that we have we need to make sure that we improve our processes at the same time that we procure any systems, because we don't necessarily want to have to custom build a system around our processes. We may need to change our processes so that it fits with a kind of off-the-shelf type systems that can be better supported. And so some of these things need to happen simultaneously, and so it takes some planning to make sure that happens.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The committee will, any other questions? Seeing none, we're going to go into our meeting session for the Appropriations Committee. For the record, I'll remind folks that we have a 1 o'clock appropriations hearing and meeting to discuss general fund transfers. All of this information is available for the committee members if they want to prepare in preparation for 1 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to ask Councilwoman Blackwell for a motion on Bill 160467.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Committee on Appropriations reports out Bill number 160467 with a favorable recommendation, also a recommendation for suspension of the rules so as to present first reading at our next session of council.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Seeing none, Bill number 160467 will be moved out of this committee with a favorable recommendation and with a rule suspension as to permit first reading at our next public session. Thank you. This concludes our meeting.
Madam Chair, can you
yes.
note my presence for the record, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Councilwoman Sherelle Parker was part of the hearing and the meeting, and the minutes should reflect that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
You mentioned that?
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, we're good.
Committee on Appropriations will now be called to order. Having established quorum, to my right, Councilman Alan Dom, to my left, Councilwoman Sherelle Parker, and to my farther left, Councilman Brian O'Neill. Will the clerk read the title of Bill number 160332?
Bill number 160332, an ordinance authorizing transfers and appropriations for fiscal year 2016 from the Grants Revenue Fund, the Director of Finance, provision for other grants to the General Fund, the Department of Streets, the Fire Department, the Department of Public Property, the Director of Finance, the Procurement Department, the Law Department, and the District Attorney.
Thank you. Does our budget director want to come forward? So I just for the council committee, I want to let folks know that there are individual testimonies by department. I'm going to let our budget director, she has a summation on it, a summary of the request, and then we'll open it up to questions. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Quiñones-Sánchez and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Anna Adams, and I serve as Budget Director for the City of Philadelphia. I appear before you today to offer testimony on Bill number 160332. Bill number 160332 provides for a transfer from the Grants Revenue Fund to the General Fund in the amount of $18,016,379. This ordinance will provide transfer appropriations to expenditure classes where shortages have occurred and/or additional resources have been deemed necessary as follows. $5.7 million to the Department of Streets to fund overtime and contractor costs accrued during the last season's snow fighting effort. $6 million to the Fire Department to fund $5 million of overtime costs and just over $1 million of Class 200, which will pay for tuition reimbursements and contracted revenue collection for provided emergency medical services. $1 million to the Department of Public Property to allow for additional preventative maintenance of buildings. $3.2 million to the Director of Finance for payment of a software license settlement with Microsoft. $1 million to the Procurement Department for advertising costs, of which $681,000 is to resolve a structural shortfall within this class, and $319,000 required as a result of the general election and upcoming presidential primary. $1 million to the Law Department for various contractual obligations, and $38,000 to the District Attorney to allow for reimbursement for personal vehicle mileage, which is an unbudgeted component of the latest FOP arbitration award. I respectfully request that you report this bill out of committee with a favorable recommendation, and I further request that the rules of council be suspended so as to permit first reading at the next session of council. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this committee today and would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Additionally, representatives from departments involved with the transfers are available as well. As the councilwoman said, we enclosed the testimony from the departments, and I can answer them and/or we can bring them up to help answer those questions.
Thank you. Can you explain the source of the grants revenue, $18 million?
So this is just coming from the way that it works is this would basically come from our fund balance. This is showing that we have, so as the year goes on, we update our fund balance every quarter. We issue our quarterly city managers report, and this is showing within our fund balance, this is where these funds are coming from.
So how does this impact the projected fund balance that was expected at the end of June 30th?
So updated fund balance, we have just over $70 million we're projecting, including these changes. That's our latest quarterly city managers report. But we included these costs within that projection of fund balance.
So what is your adjusted projected fund balance?
From the last quarter, so I think it's down by about $6 million.
About $6 million. That's as of April 10th, 2016.
So as of May 16th, which is when we put our latest quarterly report out, and that's compared to the amount that When we presented the budget on March the 3rd, we had an estimated fund balance, I think, about $76 million at that point, and it's down to about $70 million. This, I will say, like, it changes pretty regularly as we get revenues coming in. One of our biggest challenges on our revenue forecasting is with our business taxes, which come in middle of April. One of the biggest issues we have with that is that you look at our year-to-date numbers and they could be doing really well, but there's often credits that are due that we don't see until July and August. Last year that actually happened. We were forecasting that we were going to come in way over our budget, and then in July and August we realized there was a $30 million credit against those business tax revenues. Year to date, we've been monitoring them really closely because we've been really conscious of what's been happening with the business tax, and we're meeting regularly with the Revenue Department. We're doing well year to date, but we are in conversations with the Revenue Department to understand how large those credits are, so just in case we have as big a problem next, kind of at the end of the year, and we sort of don't know, unfortunately, right now how that will be. But so we haven't updated our business tax projections in this, in our fund balance projections, but we're keeping a close eye on them. I don't envision there will be less than this. I'm hoping there will be more.
That's why we need to reform the way we apply tax credits.
Yeah.
It would allow for better forecasting.
Yeah, it's really hard for us, honestly. I think some of that is that, you pay in advance, and it does cause us challenges. From the budget office perspective, it does cause us challenges just to be able to forecast out.
We've been talking for years about that first year, pay your first year and the projected future year.
Mm-hmm.
We need to create the political will to do that. That's a bad business practice.
From the budget director's point of view, it does make it hard to forecast, definitely.
How does this fund balance compare to fiscal year 14 and 15?
Let me just get.
And then I'll pass it on. Councilman
I
Dom.
don't know that off the top of my head, so I have to.
Want to acknowledge Councilwoman Blackwell has joined us.
Let's see if I have it in this document. So I haven't got 14 with me, I apologize. The FY15 fund balance was about $61 million. No, sorry, I'm mistaken, I used the wrong number. $151 million in FY15 is where we ended up. And I haven't got 14 in front of me, I apologize.
Excuse me, what was that number again?
I apologize, I don't have FY14 in front of me. I have FY15 actual fund balance, and that was $151 million.
Okay, yeah. FY14 was $202 million for the record. One of the discussions we always have is, what is an appropriate fund balance?
Yes.
To have? So what would our number be if we were following best practices?
So actually, we just had a rating agency meeting this morning with Moody's, and they talked about they see that our two biggest issues are our pension costs and the challenge related to our pension, and our low fund balances. And the recommendation would be, other cities managed to get up to like 15% of fund balance. We are so nowhere near that. So 10% would be $400 million. So kind of ideally we would be $400-500 million in a fund balance.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Excuse me, Councilwoman Sherelle Parker. Let's make it a
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, what would be the procedural motion needed for us to go into our meeting and for me to make the request to be recorded as voting aye on any activity that the committee will?
I can do that now at your request.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I am going to go temporarily into the public meeting for the purposes of allowing Councilwoman Sherelle Parker to record her votes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Due to a land use meeting of extreme importance to the 9th District, I ask to be recorded as voting aye on all activity that the committee will proceed to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will go back into the appropriations hearing, and Councilman Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I just want to ask you a few quick questions. You can give me brief answers is great.
Okay.
When you say department, so basically this is $18 million we're spreading over different departments.
Yes, that's right.
And when you say the Department of Streets Personal Services,
Yes.
what would that be?
That personal services is our class 100 line, which means it's personnel costs. And so this would be, because most of this is snow related, it's overtime related to that snow removal events. So that could be not only just the snow removal, but the kind of the subsequent planning, movement of other sanitation activities during that week because of the delays due to the snow.
So we saw last week, I think, the amount of overtime going on in the city in different departments.
Yeah.
Would most of the personal service transfers be from the overtime?
Not necessarily, but in this instance, yes. So I think it's we have snow in the fire department. It's overtime, but there is, and then let me see. And then the only other one, which is I think a class 100 cost in this. So I think we have snow, we have overtime in the fire department, and then in the district attorney, and that was related to an FOP arbitration award. So that one's not an overtime issue.
Okay. And one other question. You mentioned the Microsoft settlement.
Yes.
What was that about?
And forgive me, I'm actually going to have to, just because this was a legal settlement, I have to make sure my language is correct on this. So we have included some language in the packet which relates to it, so I want to, it's under the finance director's testimony, but it was related to an audit of our software license agreements, and this was a settlement, but due to the fact I think they found that some of our licenses weren't sufficient, and so this was a settlement that we had with Microsoft.
So let me just summarize what I think it is. We were using the software without paying for it,
Too many licenses.
Yeah,
licenses.
something along those lines, yes.
but it was $3 million worth?
Yeah, and I think that was just the settlement. But I don't think legally I'm allowed to talk too much more about it, but my understanding that was the settlement.
How could I find out offline more about
I
that?
can check to
The
you
law
after.
department.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Councilman O'Neill.
Well, one question is easily answered on the Microsoft, and I think these questions are going to be just as easy, but we had one major blizzard this year. It appears, and then my question is, but I'm going to guess the answer, it's kind of like a game show sometimes.
Hopefully I'll win lots of prizes.
The outgoing administration budgeted very little or nothing for snow removal. That's not the first time that it would have happened. It's not just snow removal that kind of gets left out. There's always some other things. Sometimes it's just dues for a membership organization or something like that. But what was our 2016 budgeted amount that we exceeded by $5,700,000?
I can get back to you. I know I'll tell you about our methodology of how we project the snow, but I don't have the exact figure in front of me. I apologize.
You can ballpark it.
But the way we actually look at a 5-year average of snow removal costs, because there are some years which obviously go really high and then some years that go low, and we try and have some basis to be able to kind of give an approximate amount, and so we use a 5-year average, and some years we do really well and we don't need that, and actually ends up using, sometimes it ends up being used within the streets department, for example, when we don't have enough sanitation vehicles, and they end up using that amount that was appropriated.
This is another form of smoothing.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think for a lot of this, it's very difficult to forecast, and so that's why we have to have some basis to be able to have to go with. Unfortunately, because we have such a limited room, we can't go. It would be great to be able to budget more for this, but we just have such limited room. So we try and use a 5-year average to hopefully get kind of a sense of what this will be. And I can get back to you in the exact amount.
It's not bad being unable to forecast, because the weather people can't forecast either a day before, so it's not a...
Exactly, and so that's how we use it. And we talk to PICA too, which is our just to make sure all of our expenditures are reasonable, and I think our 5-year average is the best that we can come up with.
Okay, and could you also give me, because I don't have it at the top of my head, what's in the Streets Department budget for 17?
Okay, so I'll
Okay.
get back to you with what we budgeted in 16 and what we'll budget in 17 for snow
Yeah.
removal events. Yep, I can do that.
Okay, but, and I'm told that while we had this enormous number for private contracting and a much smaller number for, relatively speaking, for our city forces out of our operating budget, that we still haven't gone very much further than we were this year in terms of trying to make a positive adjustment to get more in-house capacity, a lot of it being equipment, and a lot of it being personnel borrowed or contracted for by other departments or agencies. And if you could put something in writing on that, if it's just kind of going to be in 17 what it was in 16, that's fine. Whatever the answer is the answer. But I think we've learned that our employees, given the right equipment, can do a tremendous job on snow removal. Our contractors, we got way too many of them, way too many for us to keep track of, and we're spending an enormous amount of money. We used to have a few very large contractors that were extremely professional. Operating engineers, this was their art form doing this. I noticed this year, and I've noticed it in other years, that we keep control of our own stuff going on a lot better than we control the outside, and the outside has gotten a lot more numerous.
Okay.
So to the extent that there can be a real effort to either have the personnel set up coming in from other departments to aid us, or getting more equipment that we know we could utilize, because we're just blowing it out the window with on a one-time basis with the contractors. You give me a little on that, I'd appreciate it through the chair.
And actually, one of the things that we put into this capital budget this year was a much more significant investment in vehicles in the streets department.
Okay.
Partly not only because of snow removal, but we had a shortage of sanitation vehicles broadly, which affected overtime, it affected operations, it affected our ability to pick up trash on time. So we're hoping we've been working with the Office of Fleet Management to make sure we kind of get on a better cycle of replacement of vehicles. So within the capital budget, there are additional investment in streets vehicles.
Okay.
I think we could still do more, but...
I'll just throw this small one in. We fine people if they don't shovel their sidewalk. I have some properties where, in my district, where there's a school and a playground and a library. The playground never gets plowed until everything's ice because the recreation people are out on the street helping with removal. However, the school has someone in a bobcat going right down the sidewalk. The bobcat's about the right width, and the library will do the same thing. So there's a very long sidewalk, and the only place you have to fall on ice is on the Department of Recreation. They have a very good excuse, except that there is no excuse when you have another related agency next door doing the job right and having the equipment that they store right on site and everything. If somebody could look into that, it's like us being smart instead of stupid, but also being fair to the citizens that we're fining, because we don't fine ourselves. Okay, that's all.
I agree with you. It looks like we can't coordinate ourselves and
right.
leverage the resources we have. Along those lines, can you articulate for me the overtime strategy to keep the numbers down? It appears that if all of these numbers are right, and I'll get specifically to the departments, we are not just over budget, but really, really over budget. And then our fiscal 17 numbers are very ambitious about how we're going to control overtime. So what is...
Yeah, and there's actually a few factors to go. Unfortunately, it's not... So one of the issues is, obviously, we had additional costs related to the papal visit that affected overtime. So some of the FY16 numbers are inflated simply because of the papal visit, which
was, again, we projected incorrectly.
I think the expectation was that all of those costs, so this is only on the expenditure side, you don't see the revenue offset of these, and so the expenditure side is always going to be higher, even though there was a revenue offset within the departmental budgets.
But it was 16.7 million, as we talked earlier, of which we only recovered 8.
That's exactly right.
So
Yes.
So let's go.
Yeah, so, and then the other thing with, particularly on the fire department, I think, and I wasn't here during
let's talk specifically about the fire
I
department.
think it's probably easiest to. So
To
the fire
explain.
department has, because of an additional investment in personnel in the fire department, I think the expectation was therefore overtime would be brought down, and so therefore there wouldn't be this situation. Unfortunately, the timing of when those firefighters get on board, they don't actually start until June 29th, which means that all of this training is happening with these personnel. So not only does that take away, so these firefighters are not able to go out and fight fires and do all the work that we need them to be doing, and so there's still a backlog that needs to be filled with overtime because these positions aren't board. But also the inspectors, the other firefighters are the officers are actually being used to train these firefighters, and so their positions are being backfilled with overtime too. So it's a compounding impact that we strongly believe that we will not have this problem in FY17.
So let me ask you about that, because I think it's important. You have a very ambitious goal of 179 new hires.
Which will start on June 29th.
The ones that started June 29th.
They will start on June 29th, yes.
All of the 179?
That's right.
Because they're in training?
Yes.
Okay.
And they will, on June 29th, which then means that we will not need to backfill those people with overtime. They will be able to be on the street, so to speak, and help fight fires, as well as the other people needed to train them that will have to be backfilled will not happen in 16.
So what is your expected total overtime? Because in fiscal year 16, your overtime budget is 25 million. You're already at 31 million, right, for fire? What is your total now? What is it you're expected at the end of the year? Because this is not the last transfer in this line item.
It's not. So our overtime projection now, as of our last quarterly report for the fire department, is that $32.5 million.
For quarter 3, so with
That's our year-end projection for overtime now.
So with this transfer, what's the number?
That makes it to $32.5 million.
I know, so this is not the last transfer you're going to ask for this year, because we always do end of the year
A year-end
adjustments
transfer.
in September, so based
part of
on
it
this-
is, yeah, I mean, this is based on our projection. It could go worse. I mean, it could go worse than this. This is based on our latest projection of what will happen in the fire department.
I know, but if we know we're already at 32.5,
That's our projection for the end of the year.
but if we're already at 31 million with this transfer, what does this transfer get?
This transfer means that by the end of the year, we would project that we would be at 32.5 million, including this transfer.
Including this transfer.
Including this transfer. This is built into our projections.
So let's run those figures with the police department.
The police department, let me just get it. And I also just want to clarify, I mean, I'm sure you're all aware, the way that we budget is that we look at total Class 100, and overtime is a component of Class 100. And within that, even though we have a set budget for overtime, there is some flexibility between how a manager deals with their total Class 100. So if there is a shortage of positions, it's likely that overtime goes up. And so actually we may see some swings in the amount of overtime being used for a department, but it doesn't mean that total Class 100 would necessarily be a problem. In the fire department, we sort of see it as both, that the overtime is as driving up their Class 100, which is why we would need a transfer. So in the police department, our projection is actually that they will end the year at $63.7 million in overtime, but we don't envision that causing a problem for their total Class 100. Their total Class 100, we believe, will be within this projection.
So what did we budget for overtime for the police?
$49.2 million.
So the difference is what?
$14.6 million from the adopted budget. Some of that, again, is related to the papal visit. But some of that is also related. I think Commissioner Ross talked about the shortage of positions within the police department, and so because of a shortage of officers, their overtime costs necessarily go up. But again, we do not envision there will be a shortage of Class 100 total in the police department, so we do not envision a year-end transfer for them at all.
So will the police department, similar to the fire, are they ready to staff up? Because we do have 200 and something vacancies.
And I think Commissioner Ross talked a little bit about it during his budget testimony. They are struggling to hire officers, and I think some of the work that he's trying to do about changing the requirements needed that he believes will help on the recruitment of officers. I know that's been a real struggle for the police department for the last year or so, and I think it's a problem nationwide. But it's something that he's really strongly trying to address, and he's doing what he can.
So how many classes do you realistically think hires will have for the police department?
I will get back to you. I don't have that off the top of my head. I apologize.
I'm going to, Councilman Don, did you? Some more, but go ahead.
Shall we go?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's just a question on the, I guess, Bill number 160332, which has to do with one of my two favorite subjects, I think, OPA. And it
Okay.
seems that we're funding $1 million to meet fiscal year 16 obligations, of which $750 for legal counsel, which is great, and $250 for appraisal services.
Oh, sorry, in the law department. Sorry, I'm just trying to check where you were looking. Yes.
So my concern is that may not be enough.
This is just for FY16, so this is just for this current year. It's
Okay.
not necessarily reflecting what they will
This is
spend.
an over-expenditure.
This is an over-expenditure within this current FY16
Okay, so
budget.
all I want to bring to light, and you know this, is that we need to invest more money in that area to make sure we accurately collect these monies that we're owed.
Yeah, and we agree.
Okay, thanks.
So what is the appropriation for this year?
For the tax assessment appeals,
Mm-hmm.
I will get back to you on that total. Within the law department, I don't know whether someone's from the law department yet. No, they're not. But I will get back to you. That they're class 200. There's a whole list of different types of contracts, and so I don't have it added up in front of me.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about public property. I know our commissioner's back there, if she can come forward. There's $1 million in preventive maintenance on certain buildings, so I'd like to get an update about our staffing levels in our preventive maintenance teams, since some of us fought very hard to build
Yes.
that out.
Good afternoon, members of the Councilwoman Sanchez and members of the Appropriation Committee. I am Bridget Collins-Greenwald, the Commissioner of Public Property. So I'll give you an update on your question, and then I can get into the details on this. So our preventive maintenance program is fully staffed now. So as you stated, you guys fought really hard for us to get that, and we are quite appreciative. So we have a team on second shift, we have a team on third shift, and we have a team on first shift, or regular shift, that goes out at regular intervals and does things like it takes care of the air conditioners before the summer season, it takes care of the heaters before the winter season. That's our main focus, but all along the year, once a month, we're going into each station, each police district, and we're doing all the routine maintenance in the hopes that we can defer, and we're trying to keep everything together. So it's been very successful. We used to have, I don't know the exact number, but we are down to a 1% reactive rate right now, and I know it was much higher when I came. I don't have exact numbers because you might recall we also didn't have a system where we were tracking things, but now that we have this system, so 1% of reactive maintenance, meaning where it seems like anecdotally when I first got here, we would get calls all the time. I would get calls in the middle of the night. This fire station is flooded. This fire station, sewage is backed up. And we all know these stories. We've had these horrible stories. So we went out and did a complete preventive maintenance program on the laterals, so we don't have that issue anymore. So things like that have cut down and given us the ability to actually go out and proactively, maintain things instead of always being, chasing our tail. So it's been very successful. And I do appreciate that, getting that appropriation a few years ago.
This $1 million was for an emergency soil pipe replacement, that's why it's out of whack.
So here's what happened with that. So we had a couple emergencies last year, so it wasn't on our preventive maintenance thing. So actually, it was to a point, and that's how we discovered this. So engine 9, while doing this lateral check, we found out there was a broken soil pipe, which we found a few of them in doing this preventive maintenance program. Most of them did not add up to the cost of engine 9, which I believe was $130,000, just an additional cost. Most of them were costing a few $1,000s to actually dig it up and fix and thing. We also had, we were doing maintenance in the municipal services building, and we noticed something was going on, and here we had a cracked sanitary line there. That was an additional $250,000. So in addition to our core budget, which we get by with about $37 million to maintain all the buildings that we do, these were additional costs that just happened. I hope last year was just a fluke year and all these things happened to happen all at one time, but that's where these costs come in. So we had a few incidents just like that, and that added up.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So when you say fully staffed, how many exactly are we talking about?
Our preventive maintenance program has 29 employees in it. And there are various, titles.
Okay. I know you had some challenges around recruitment and diversity. How did you make out when you finally got up to your staffing number?
So we're actually in the process right now of recruiting for a deputy commissioner of facilities management, a deputy commissioner of capital programs, and a deputy commissioner of real estate. So I've been working with the new Office of Talent and HR, the group that Jackie Linton heads, and we've been putting the job announcements not only onto, phil.gov, but they're going out to the Black Society of Engineers, they're going out to IFMA, so they're getting out there more.
Dom? We need a DC of capital and a DC of real estate.
And the DC of real estate, we're working on the spec right now because we want to kind of change that a little bit. So yeah, if anybody knows anybody, let me know.
Thank you. Thanks, that'll be all. Thank you so much. And again, I know you're updating the whole maintenance listing as we talked about our public facilities piece. One of the things as we've had the discussion with the Department of Rec is, if that's a place that we need to staff up more because it is long-term saving us money, that's a conversation we want to continue to have.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
We talked about the procurement, the litigation, the procurement election advertising costs, the $1 million.
Yes.
So we've been talking about updating our legal notice requirements. I'm going to ask you what I always ask the city commissioners: why are we putting Spanish language ads in the Inquirer?
Yeah, and actually we've had conversations about, there's a lot of conversations that have been happening internally, or a few conversations have been happening internally about advertising in general. If we're trying to reach certain populations, advertising in certain newspapers may not get there. Some of this, I think there are some legal issues that we have to work through, and there are some just general practice issues that we need to work through, both on the commissioner's side and in procurement. But we've started those conversations, and I agree with you. There are better and probably cheaper things to do that we could actually reach.
Technology has changed.
Yes,
okay.
I agree.
Laura, I'm going to keep asking that every time we go over budget.
No, and I agree. And this is not just, challenges of different languages. One of the things that we also found, and this is not just in procurement, but we need to start getting on a better cyclical cycle with understanding advertising. So there was no difference, no change in the budget in FY16 and FY17, which doesn't make much sense considering this is the presidential primary and presidential election this year. So we want to start getting on a more of a 4-year cycle where we understand the types of elections and that we budget appropriately, both in the commissioner's office as well as...
Somebody didn't know it was a presidential election?
We did not change the budget, which doesn't make any sense that we should have. We should be more thoughtful about how we plan for this. There are different types of elections that affect our budget differently, and so we should plan for that. And so we want to be doing a better job with that and kind of managing it and understand that the mayoral election is different from other types of elections too, and we need to plan for that differently.
Yep. Okay. Then I had a question around this arbitration for the FOP arbitration from the DA's office, the $38,000. I understand this is a legal situation also. Are we opening up a floodgate? Are we going to get sued?
My understanding of this is related to one individual who was able yeah, and actually people from the district attorney's office should handle this more than I can, so. I was going to answer it, but I realized that they could probably speak to this better than I can.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Sanchez, other council members.
Your name for the record.
My name is Doreen Rooney, and I am the Chief Financial Officer of the District Attorney's Office. This arbitration award, this one in particular, was for just one individual who was a captain in our office. The FOP arbitration award was granted to all individuals ranking captain and above in the police department as well as in our office that had take-home privileges when the city allowed FOP members to live outside of the city limits. The individuals were instructed that they were not permitted to take home the city vehicles through the residences outside of the city. The arbitration said they came to an agreement that we had to reimburse, us as well as the police department had to reimburse the officers that had take-home privileges because the union was allowing them to live out of the city and they should still continue to have those take-home privileges. So this amount is to reimburse for the mileage during the time period where this individual was not permitted to take home his vehicle.
I believe it goes back 3 years that this is the
So my question is, moving forward, what is going to be the practice and the protocol, given that?
My understanding is that anyone of that rank of captain and above who is allowed to have take-home privileges, if they live outside of the city, they are permitted to take their vehicle home to their residence.
So that was the resolution, we're going to let them take their cars to Bucks County or whatever, as opposed to?
That was under the arbitration award.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, the Appropriations Committee will go into its stated meeting. I am going to ask my colleague, Councilwoman Blackwell, for a motion on Bill 160332.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that Bill number 160332 be reported out of committee with a favorable recommendation, and also a recommendation that the rules be suspended so as to permit first reading at our next session of council.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any oppositions? Seeing none, Bill number 160332 will be moved out of this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading at our next council session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good job. Thanks. Thank you.